Welcome back to My Hero Academia Overanalyzed. Today's episode is Season 1, Episode 7, Deku vs. Kacchan.
Come on! Let's fight bad guys!
Opening on the flashback was generally a good call, though I think the direction kind of falters a bit here. The music is just not it, especially once we cut back to the present. Bringing back the not all men are created equal line in relation to Bakugo being given an extremely powerful quirk, rather than Deku being born quirkless, is also really smart, but I think re-recording the line in a more sinister tone, and also, again, having better fitting music, would make this moment really stick out. As is, it kind of just blends into the before credits recap.
So there's a 15-minute time.
This is a cool-ass timer. That is all. I just like this timer. Does this count as a clock? No, I said no digital ones.
What'll Kacchan do now? Knowing him, he'll be impatient and try another big punch!
We got him countering Bakugo in the last episode, but here we get a taste of his actual mindset, similar to episode 2. This is also good at cementing the fact that Izuku can keep up with people even when not using his quirk, by using his analysis and general situational awareness.
Plus, he spent years taking notes on different heroes.
I wonder if Izuku's hero notebook played into All Might's decision to give him one for all at all. It's certainly possible. Also, knowing he read the book before telling Izuku that he couldn't be a hero makes that scene all the more sad. I bet it was difficult for All Might to be honest to him back then, considering how obviously passionate Izuku was about heroes.
He's switching things up so I can't predict his moves.
Izuku deciding to immediately retreat when in unfamiliar territory, that being Bakugo being potentially worried and desperate, is incredibly good situational awareness from Izuku. This also factors into Izuku mostly just wanting to waste Bakugo's time. As he says later, Izuku doesn't think he could have won in a head-to-head, so using both his learned strategies to avoid Bakugo when he's on the attack, and running when he is able to, is just plain good battle sense. Hell, it's what's meant to be taught by the final exams at the end of the next season, and he did it in their first combat training. Once again, Izuku's mental game is already ahead of his peers.
You were tricking me for years by acting weak! Bet you've been laughing behind my back, huh?
Here we see a desperate attempt at Bakugo rationalizing what is happening. I couldn't imagine being in that situation for him. Once again, that ball throw really shattered Bakugo's entire perception of Izuku, and now that it's out of the bag, Bakugo seems the worst. This is his inferiority complex. He assumes Izuku was doing exactly what he himself was doing to him. He also immediately looks to challenge Izuku, as Bakugo winning against him would correct this seeming wrong. If he wins this, he'll still be above Izuku, better than Izuku. So he desperately wants to win this, and as we see later on, when that doesn't happen, he can't handle that reality well at all.
But this level of pride is something else. It may end up being his demise.
It's really good that Bakugo has as strong convictions as he does, because having these complexes could easily lead to manipulation if left unchecked. That may be what All Might is thinking, but as we know later on, his desire for heroism is an even stronger conviction for Bakugo than being above others. We see this in both the final exams, and when he's kidnapped by the League of Villains.
I'll just have to capture Kacchan down here, on my own. I can do it.
I would say it's bold to assume that he could win in a 1v1 against Bakugo, but he came millimeters away from doing that earlier, so I guess it's fair for Izuku to think this way, though obviously that doesn't pan out. Also, the anime doesn't adapt this frankly horrifying panel of Ida and Bakugo. Oh my goodness.
You gotta believe me! I take back everything I said.
It's pretty crazy how much Izuku's confidence has improved since getting into UA. I think that also actually being able to hold his ground against Bakugo, even briefly, was a big boost for him, considering Bakugo has essentially been terrorizing him for 10 years, all without a quirk as well. I kind of like that in the anime, the explosions started as little small pops, rather than the manga's more traditional Bakugo explosion. It's a good way to imply the growth and improvement of his power as he got older.
It's gonna grow into an amazing quirk.
Definitely. A flashy quirk for a future hero.
These poor people didn't know what monster they were creating. Teaches them to be actually nice to a student.
Deku doesn't have a quirk like no.
The return of the feet imagery! This is definitely one of the most blatant examples of quirklessness being tied to feet in the series, outside of that one manga panel I showed before. Once again, it's crazy how much this shows up.
Are you hurt?
The ever-iconic river scene. So, in these two flashbacks, we see both the birth of his superiority complex and his inferiority complex, both being triggered by frankly incredibly mundane events. You guys getting tired of me talking about these complexes yet? Anyways, what's interesting about this is a lot of the time in stories with villains, if you want to redeem someone who is bad, you give them a tragic backstory, or something that humanizes them. Hell, we see My Hero do it all the time with their villains. But for Bakugo, he doesn't have that luxury. He doesn't have that scapegoat of a sad childhood, bad parents, or anything of that sort, which makes the challenge of redeeming him much harder from a story writing perspective, even if he hasn't done anything as actually bad as the villains. This is why you see people downplaying the League's horrible actions a lot of the time. It's because they are tragic characters, and Bakugo is decidedly not. To me, that struggle the story has of making him likable despite that makes him all the more interesting. All of this development throughout the series is simply overcoming himself, his own mindset. Not a traumatic event, not a terrible situation, simply his own ego. That's what the purpose of this scene is. It's not to explain why he's like this, it's to show that he is just a kid with an ego.
I won't fail this trial and risk bringing shame down on the Ida family name.
I know in the preview of the last episode it already showed that he was part of a hero family, but this line could also be a small setup for him being part of one as well. Also, I don't really have any over-analysis of it, but Evil Ida is an amazing bit.
I knew you would come here alone the instant that Bakugo ran off by himself and engaged with Midoriya.
Ida immediately trying to work around Bakugo going rogue is also really cool setup for his ability to stay calm in situations out of his control. Once again, just more good characterization and arguably some small setup for episode 9. I love this effect on the gauntlet. Does this ever come back? I don't think so, which is a shame really. Though him firing his gauntlets in general isn't used a whole lot in the series, maybe like half a dozen times. Pretty obvious, but you can literally see his superiority complex facade fade over his inferiority complex after Izuku says he's not scared of him. It's really good how much they emphasize these two aspects of him in this episode without completely beating you over the head with it. In the manga, it's even more subtle, not an expression of anger, but almost one of fear.
He'll be fine as long as he dodges!
The English dub here makes Bakugo seem even more murderous, with the sub in manga saying that if he doesn't hit him, he won't die, which kind of implies Bakugo isn't going for a direct hit, so it's kind of funny that in the dub he seems even more crazed. Not sure which one I prefer, maybe the sub because it ties more into a line All Might says later, but I still do like the line, "He'll be fine as long as he dodges." This is an amazing cut by Masashi Takai. The framing always really stood out to me, and I think it's partially because of the amazing manga panel it's adapting. Such a good use of negative space here.
The more nitro sweat that's stored in these gauntlets, the stronger the explosion is!
In the manga, these lines aren't actually said by Bakugo, but by the narrator. Also, there's a small change from the sub to the dub here, where rather than saying Izuku can't beat him with his power, he says he wants to beat Izuku while he uses his quirk. Small, but it definitely leads more to what I said earlier about Bakugo wanting to defeat Izuku to feel superior, and to do that he has to make sure Izuku uses his quirk. It's kind of like how in Season 2 Bakugo wins against Shoto in the sports festival, but is still pissed off because Shoto wasn't using his full power. This is that, but maybe even on a more personal level. Honestly, Ida grabbing the bomb is such a smart move. I don't think I would have thought of that. Though in a real scenario, you might not want to be moving around an arm bombed at speeds like that. Still, very good move from Ida's part. Again, showing his adaptability really well.
Despite his fierce posturing, he's not actually trying to kill Midoriya.
Cool of All Might to piece this together just by a few of his actions, though we absolutely should have stopped the fight after that grenade stunt and Bakugo not listening to him. To be honest, I think it's kind of insane that the support company that made their suits even allowed a 14-year-old to wield a power like that. That's an accident waiting to happen. Also in the manga, Bakugo's reaction to All Might saying he'll be penalized is this panel of him going, "Come on, man!" And I think it's kind of a shame that it was cut. I don't know why I like it as much as I do.
It's no good! I can't dodge this!
In the manga, Izuku actually says "damn" here, which for someone who unironically says "holy whoa," it kind of caught me off guard. Also, I love the stylized colors here. It's something I wish the show did more often.
He doesn't come off as a guy with a strategy, but he's actually quite intelligent.
Thank you, Shoto. Exactly what I was going to point out. I mentioned back in episode 1 something that the show does a lot, especially in the early setup for Bakugo's character, is that it takes a lot of opportunities to emphasize his intelligence. I didn't delve into it much then, but I think a reason why it's so important is once again subversion. A lot of people describe My Hero Academia as subverting a lot of shonen tropes, while still at its core being a very shonen story. A lot of people point to the lack of mentor death, the hopeful tone staying consistent even while it gets darker, and especially a lot of Bakugo's character as a whole. The most common thing people point to is the fact that Bakugo, despite being an antagonistic force, doesn't turn to evil at any point. This is true in a great part of Bakugo's character, but I think it goes even deeper than that, and his intelligence is part of that subversion. I said earlier a way to make an antagonist redeemable is to give them tragedy, and Bakugo already doesn't have that. Well, what's another way to redeem someone who is egotistical or brash? It's to knock them down a peg. That's why I say a lot of characters that serve a role like Bakugo's are characterized to be stupid, because if it isn't a tragic backstory, it's overconfidence. But Bakugo, once again, subverts this by being intelligent. His confidence is never the sole reason for the story to humble him, because he more often than not can back it up with his pure skill and intellect. Sure, he fails sometimes, but it's never the only factor in his growth. I'd argue that this fight in particular is one of the only times Bakugo loses based on just overconfidence, and we can see clearly that him just losing against someone he thought was weak isn't going to be a fast track for redemption. It only serves as a kickstarter for it. This may sound like a negative, but once again, having Bakugo not have any of the easy ways of redemption, and instead having to near exclusively take the path of personal growth through self-reflection, and more importantly, learning from the example Izuku sets, makes his arc an extremely unique and compelling one to me. Horikoshi deliberately has locked himself out of any easy redemption arc for Bakugo here in these first 10 chapters, and I think that's entirely on purpose.
Deku! Don't you ever forget what you are! You're a weakling!
Once again, a lot of Bakugo's dialogue here is him desperately trying to restore his own personal status quo. More than anything, he's convincing himself that Izuku's weak, not necessarily trying to convince Izuku of such.
He's running away!
Why is the stork running on all fours? Ooh, just a moment of appreciation for that sound design. The steam coming off of Bakugo's hand is so satisfying. What's cool about this moment in hindsight is you can kind of see where Izuku begins to lure Bakugo into the right spot to pull this moment off. Remember when he ran on all fours? That wasn't just to get away, it was to position Bakugo in the right spot underneath the pillar. I think it's kind of cool that we don't always get to see what Izuku's planning in the moment, so it can be a surprise to us when Izuku enacts a plan that he thought up on the spot. Speaking of which, it wasn't a bad one for being improvised, though as Momo points out next episode, it was kind of reckless. But as a way to purely win the exercise, I think it really shows Izuku's quick thinking off well. What this fight does as a whole is really good for Izuku and Bakugo's characters. There's a lot of setup here that can easily go unnoticed, but I think the big thing it establishes between them is that Izuku is more strategy smart and Bakugo is more combat smart. Bakugo's main folly right now is his lack of planning, but despite that, he still has the sheer skill and power to almost win by pure brute force. On the other hand, Izuku lasts almost this whole fight purely based on strategy and planning, enacting multiple long-term plans and waiting for the perfect moments to execute and use his pre-fight analysis of Bakugo's quirk and fighting style against him. They are almost opposites here in how they approach this battle, and I think that contrast is important to their dynamic, as going forward they begin to learn the best of each other's way of handling battles.
Improvise special move! The coming home run!
It should also not be overlooked how well Ochako managed to adapt. Obviously she wasn't really the focus of this fight, but without her and her ability to react to Izuku's change in their plans, their team also wouldn't have won. Do you think the weapon became weightless here? That looks an awful lot like 5 fingers touching it to me.
You were playing me this entire time, you bastard!
This is a trait of Bakugo's that's often overlooked in regards to his inferiority complex. Whenever something goes wrong for him, he always assumes that it's because the other party is more smart than him. This happens a few times in this episode alone, but I think it's interesting to see how his inferiority complex manifests, like everyone is against him. His biggest fear seems to be people looking down on him, so whenever something doesn't go right for him, rather than thinking the more rational thing, like Izuku adapting to Bakugo, he assumes he's been played for a fool. I think this manifestation of that inferiority complex is actually really realistic, which is cool to me.
The hero team wins!
It's pointed out next episode, but I think it's really poetic that the winners of this battle are easily the ones that lost the battle. Like, if this was going purely off the state of the heroes and the villains, Bakugo and Ida would have unquestionably won. It really was just Izuku being able to take advantage of his strategy and Bakugo's lack of one that got them the victory. I would go more into how that affects Bakugo, but I'll have a lot of chances to do that next episode. Speaking of which, that's the episode. Obviously quite a standout of the first season. I think outside of the opening episodes and the All Might fight, this is really one of the defining moments of the season overall, and for good reason. This does a lot of legwork for Bakugo and Izuku as you'd expect, and beyond just the obvious, I think it does a really good job at setting up the smaller seeds in the plot for Bakugo's character growth later on. Bakugo has one of the longest arcs in the entire series, and this really is the beginning of it, and I think it's a fantastic start. And that's not even mentioning how great Ida is, the action and animation being good, and of course Izuku's own developments in this episode. This is probably the episode that does the most legwork for the future this season, outside of the first 2 episodes, and it's cool to see the start of all these threads that will be resolved literal hundreds of chapters later. But that's all for the episode. Next time is Bakugo's start line. Want to hear even more about inferiority complexes? See you then.